Hi, everybody joining on YouTube. We're about to begin, but we're giving one more minute for folks to filter on who are joining us on Zoom. Okay, I've got 6:30. Mike, is it okay if I begin? All right.
Absolutely, you may
live.
begin.
Fantastic. Hi, everybody. My name is Noah Wheat-Feinstein. I'm the director of UW-Madison's Holtz Center for Science and Technology Studies. We are extremely proud to sponsor this event with our partners at the Wisconsin Union Directorate, and terrifically excited to hear tonight from Moya Bailey. For those who are new to Moya Bailey's work, she is a brilliant writer, activist, and scholar who's attracted academic and popular attention around the country and beyond. A graduate of Spelman College and Emory University, Dr. Bailey is currently Associate Professor of Communication Studies at Northwestern University. She's known for her books, #Activism, and more recently, Misogynoir Transformed, Black Women's Digital Resistance, as well as her work with the Octavia Butler Legacy Network, which is actually how I first encountered her work, and the Quirky Black Girls Collective. Dr. Bailey is the sort of scholar who makes things happen in digital as well as offline communities. And I hope you will all join me in welcoming her with your spirits if you can't make yourself heard, with a little clap icon if you want to, or in the chat. Welcome, Moya.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here. And thanks for the friends who I see in the audience, in the virtual audience. I'm really, really grateful. I am so happy to be here virtually. I want to thank you, Noah, for extending this invitation, which has been, as we discussed before, 2 years in the making.
2 years.
Yeah, so I'm just so grateful to you and all of the people who made this virtual visit possible. I'm going to share my screen so that you can see some slides I'd like to share with you all.
While Moya is pulling up the slides, I'm just going to give you a brief introduction to how this is going to go. First, Moya Bailey will be sharing her work with us, some specific sections and some themes from her most recent book. And then I will ask her a few questions to get the conversation going. And then there'll be an opportunity for those who have joined us on Zoom to ask their own questions, which you can do by raising your hand using the raise hand feature.
Wonderful. So just to begin, I am available to connect with you all via Twitter. So my Twitter handle is here. So please feel free to reach out after the talk if you'd like. I also want to acknowledge that I'm joining you all from the traditional unceded homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, the Ottawa, and Potawatomi nations. Many other tribes such as the Miami, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Sac, and Fox also call this area home. You know it as Chicago. I was really moved by a non-land acknowledgement in which Indigenous elders made clear that land acknowledgements are not enough and that they can sometimes be used to help white supremacy relax. And I'm not interested in helping white supremacy relax, but when it comes to our turn to the digital in these pandemic times, it can be easy to forget that there is hardware that runs all over Turtle Island that connects our digital devices, and that this hardware is made from minerals extracted from stolen land and mined by exploited people around the world. So when discussing my work and its social justice implications, I don't want to forget the too often invisibilized logics of settler colonialism that can become even harder to see or acknowledge with our need to turn towards digital technology in the time of COVID. I'm going to also just give a brief overview of what I'll be talking about tonight. A little bit from the preface, what misogynoir is, how misogynoir in media shows up, and really one of the key concepts of this text is that Black women do not equal Black feminists, and that digital alchemy and transformative justice are essential tools that Black feminists, Black women use to create what they need to survive. So with that, I will begin with the preface. Although I did not know it at the time, I started writing this book as an undergraduate at Spelman College. I was on the road to becoming a medical doctor when two things happened that made me shift course. I fell in love with women's studies, and I got international attention as one of the leaders of a small pushback on campus against the rapper Nelly. Both events profoundly shaped my thinking about the way Black women are treated in society and moved me to coin the term misogynoir, which in turn led to the book. As a first-year student from tiny Fayetteville, Arkansas, I was appalled when Dr. Beverly Guy-Sheftall told the Spelman College entering class of 2005 about Sarah Bartman's experiences as a human exhibit in Europe during the early 19th century. Bartman, a young Khoisan woman from what we now recognize as South Africa, was displayed throughout Europe to paying white audiences as an example of the animalistic and inferior nature of the African woman. Implicit in her display was a comparison between her body and that of the white women who viewed her. European scientists equated Bartman's anatomical differences with sexual deviance, drawing conclusions about her sexuality and subsequently the sexuality of Black women from her form. Her butt and genitalia were used to justify racist science and sexualized violence, as well as the continued enslavement of Africans in the New World. Dr. Guy-Sheftall explained that the exploitative way Bartman's body was treated in life and in death was made possible under the guise of, quote, objective science, though what Bartman actually endured was objectification through scientific racism and sexism. In my first week at Spelman, before I'd even attended a class, Dr. Guy-Sheftall had challenged my thinking by describing the differential treatment Black women experienced on a global stage. After that moment, I knew I wanted to take every class I could with her, and I was awakened to the profundity of the unique nexus of experience that is Black and woman on this planet and throughout colonial history. As a 19-year-old junior and then president of the Feminist Majority Leadership Alliance at Spelman, I showed the group Nelly's music video for the song Chip Drill, which had started airing on the late-night television show BET Uncut. The video featured most memorably a scene where Nelly slides a credit card down the crack of a Black woman's butt. Our group decided to name him our misogynist of the month, not knowing that the Spelman Student Government Association had agreed to partner with Nelly and his foundation to hold a bone marrow registration drive on our campus in an effort to save the life of his sister who had leukemia. We raised questions about the misogynoir in his video and lyrics, and when we heard that Nelly was invited to campus, it seemed only fair that we ask him about the way he represented Black women, since he was asking us for our help. Nelly declined our offer to talk about his music and instead went to the press, twisting the story such that it seemed that Spelman had canceled the bone marrow registration drive because of the video, an assertion that people still believe today, even though Spelman orchestrated its own drive. The story garnered national and eventually international headlines, both praising and condemning Spelman students for daring to talk back to the music. It was a hard lesson in the hypervisibility and invisibility of being a Black woman. Nelly felt entitled to our assistance with saving his sister's life, but did not feel that he had to address us, the Black women who dealt with the fallout of his video and lyrics in our day-to-day lives. As young Black women, we felt the impact of the video and lyrics in the form of street harassment in the United States and abroad. We dealt with assumptions about our sexual availability to men in the forms of unsolicited commentary on our bodies and our clothing and on our time. I wasn't quite able to connect the dots between popular media representations of Black women and my and other Black women's experiences with discriminatory housing practices, intimate partner violence, street harassment, employment discrimination, and ill treatment from healthcare providers. But my interest in the role media plays in shaping the perceptions of Black women became all-consuming, such that the goal of becoming a medical doctor morphed into getting a doctorate to investigate the role that media representations play in the treatment of Black women patients by white doctors. I learned about the ways historical popular culture seeped into the consciousness of supposedly objective future physicians, which prompted me to consider how popular culture representations influence Black women's treatment in medicine today. And that's when I landed on the word misogynoir to describe the particular venom directed at Black women through negative representations in media. I played with a couple of terms before landing on misogynoir, and initially it only existed in my dissertation until I was invited to join the Crunk Feminist Collective, an online blogging community for feminists of color. It was there that I used the word and other members of the collective started to use the term, and it appeared in more posts on the blog. From there, some members of the blogosphere began to use it, but no one more compellingly than womanist blogger Trudy at the now sunsetted Gradient Layer. Her work introduced online communities to the word, and she deftly articulated its utility. Her work and others helped the term reach a wide range of audiences, including an international one. So when I coined the term, I didn't expect it to go viral, and it definitely came from the situations that happened at Spelman. What you see here in this image is the Spelman Cosby Center. The windows that are kind of bowed out on the second floor of the building is actually where women's studies, comparative women's studies major and department are held on campus, which is, very a little bit odd and awkward given what we know about Bill Cosby at this time, and even his wife Camille, which is how the name of the building has been reframed. So what exactly is misogynoir? Misogynoir is a term I created to describe the anti-Black racist misogyny that Black women experience, particularly in US visual and digital culture. It's not simply the racism that Black women encounter, nor is it the misogyny Black women negotiate. Misogynoir describes the uniquely co-constitutive, racialized, and sexist violence that befalls Black women as a result of their simultaneous and interlocking oppression at the intersection of racial and gender marginalization. It's a portmanteau of misogyny, the hatred of women, and noir, the French word for Black, which also carries a specific meaning in film and other media. French film critic Nino Frank coined the term film noir in 1946 to describe the gritty, cynical, and initially American movies that had unusually cruel themes for the time. The motion picture genre is characterized by its dark and sometimes sexually charged undercurrents. Examples include films like The Maltese Falcon and Sunset Boulevard. Like film noir, misogynoir originally described American media, but similarly grew to transcend borders to describe an unfortunately global phenomenon. Whether in film and television, or as I examine in the book, digital media, misogynoir has found its home in each of the communication advancements of the last 2 centuries. Misogynoir is perpetuated through popular media like cartoons, minstrel shows, yearbooks, televisions, movies, and even Facebook, the digital descendant of yearbooks. Black feminist theory clearly articulates the power of the image to serve hegemony, or the white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, by controlling the way society views marginalized groups and how we view ourselves. The late Black feminist theorist Bell Hooks discusses the importance of producing images that counter the normal positive images that can confine and constrain. We need complex images that break the good, bad, white, Black dichotomy. As Hooks offers in her book, Black Looks, we should be asking ourselves questions about what types of images subvert, pose critical alternatives, and transform our worldviews and move us away from dualistic thinking about good and bad. Similarly, Patricia Hill Collins argues against controlling images that attempt to delimit the potential ways of being for Black women in the world. The media that circulate misogynoir help maintain white supremacy by offering tacit approval of the disparate treatment that Black women negotiate in society. Whether that's the Jezebel, Mammy, Sapphire, and later the welfare queen, or even the strong Black woman archetype, misogynoiristic portrayals of Black women shape their livelihoods and health. As media studies scholars attest, negative images and narratives do more than just affect the self-esteem of the populations depicted. Misogynoiristic caricatures materially impact the lives of Black women by justifying poor treatment throughout all areas of society and throughout US history. There remains a belief that recognizing the misogynoir experienced by Black women detracts from efforts to support Black men and boys. In the wake of seasons of unarmed Black men being gunned down by the police, instances of Black women's murders at the hands of the police have not evoked the same demands for police accountability. Boston activist and 2020 poet laureate Portia Olayowola's poem, Rekia Boyd, asked the question why no one showed up for a rally in Boyd's honor following her slaying by off-duty police officer Dante Servin over an alleged noise complaint.
Last night, no one showed up to march for Rekia Boyd. Rekia was shot dead in the head by cops in Chicago on Monday. A Cook County judge acquitted police of killing Rekia. Dante Servin, charged of manslaughter, went jailbird free. Rekia Boyd was a 22-year-old unarmed Black woman living on the south side of Chicago, and last night, no one showed up to march at her rally. I guess all the protesters got tied up. I guess all the Black folks were busy making signs saying, "Stop killing our Black boys." I guess no one hears the howling of a Black girl ghost in the nighttime. We stay unheard, blotted out, buried, dead. Black girls receive tombstones too soon and never any flowers to dress the grave, so we fight alone. They will tell you the woes of a Black man who got beat by police in the street, beat by the man at work, beat by the system at the institution, but never of the Black woman he took his frustration out on, never of the Black girl he stretched into a casket. They will tell you of the brown boys who get pushed from school through pipeline to prison, but never of the girls who fill the cells, never of the orange jumpsuits they camouflage into. 200 Black girls go missing in Nigeria, and America puts out a hashtag instead of a search party. No one ever causes a riot. The first Black first lady is being called the first ape on all of the media outlets, and no one is outraged. There ain't no boycott or nothing. Down the street, a man did a hate speech to a black butch woman, and someone gave it a 10. Someone said it was freedom. Poets are still over there cheering. I guess queer black woman ain't black enough. I guess the movement ain't meant to be a crossroad. I guess we are here for play, for make-believe, pretend, poof. How magic trick missing must I become? How tight does my noose have to ring? How long does my body need to deteriorate before anyone can smell it rot? If a black boy gets shot by the cops, isn't that a tragedy? Ain't it the blues? Isn't it a misfortune if a black girl gets killed by police and the killer goes free? Does anyone notice? Do you still call it a lynching? Is her rally just a rehearsal? Ain't that why no one ever shows up?
Olayiwola describes the disproportionate attention Black men and boys get when they are violated in the absence of similar demands for justice when a Black woman is killed. I argue that the silence and erasure of the violence Black women and girls endure are connected to society's inability to see them as worthwhile subjects, deserving of respect and care, a sentiment exacerbated by misogynoir. Olayiwola's words echo the epigraph that animates this text, reminding us that since we are Black women who fight alone, we must also save ourselves. Part of this saving includes the creation of representations that challenge the ways that we're viewed. Representations of Black women in popular culture help support and perhaps even bolster the harm that they can experience. In 2003, when 15-year-old Sakia Gunn and friends refused the street harassment of 29-year-old Richard McCullough and his friends by saying they were lesbians, McCullough got out of his car to retaliate. McCullough stabbed Gunn and fled, and though she was rushed to the hospital, she later died of her injuries. McCullough's sense of entitlement to Gunn's attention pushed him out of the car and into choking her friend and ultimately killing Gunn. His beliefs about her sexuality and his right to control and punish her for what he perceived as its misapplication have everything to do with the ways misogynoir makes Black women and girls seem undeserving of their autonomy in their lives. When Black women are only rendered visually as in service to men, their autonomy is not believed. Misogynoir can precipitate racist gendered violence that harms the social well-being and impacts mental and physical health, and can even result in death, the direst of health outcomes. It was in writing this book that I struggled to come up with the language that fully captured who's engaged with this transformation of misogynoir. The term Black women is often assumed to mean straight and cis, with queer and trans Black women identified explicitly because of this normative assumption. Additionally, the term Black women is not inclusive of non-binary, agender, and gender variant Black folks whose experiences of misogynoir are intimately connected with the misgendering of them. I struggled to reconcile my use of a term that is central to my definition of misogynoir, yet excludes some of the people most invested in its transformation. For those of us on the margins of Black womanhood, woman is not what we name ourselves, even as the misogynoir colors our experience of the world. It is often those of us in the shadow of Black women who are the most engaged in media projects that transform misogynoir. As we in the shadows are already limited by the frame of Black womanhood, we become some of misogynoir's most vociferous opponents because it further diminishes our already limited light. When a hetero and cisnormative understanding of Black women is used, it obscures the reality of those of us in the shade. I experimented with terms to describe those of us on the margins of Black womanhood, as I experimented with terms before landing on misogynoir. Digital spaces are rife with words and phrases and terms that attempt, sometimes awkwardly, to address the slippages between women and all who aren't cis men. One of these terms is non-men, which centers men as it attempts to define those who are not. Non-men is used online as a catch-all term, but its use recreates the exact erasure it wants to undo. Women X seems a useful interlocutor with its roots in pre-colonial indigenous languages and contemporary decolonial lingual practices. The X in Women X, intervenes in the racist colonial histories of English and Spanish, while also attempting to solve the problem of genders beyond the man-woman binary. That's a lot of work for one letter to accomplish. And even as Women X by definition includes gender, non-binary, agender, and gender variant people who don't identify as women, reading the term in text does not make those communities readily apparent. As S.A. Smythe asks in their article on Black feminism slippages with the terms feminist and women, who all over there in Women X? When a term is created to encapsulate those outside or alongside the term Black women, another erasure occurs. The phrase women and femmes has also been used in social media spaces to make space for those who are not women, but may find themselves hailed by the term femme, which also has contested meanings. But women and femmes doesn't quite capture all the targets of misogynoir. There are masculine of center, agender, and non-binary people who experience the deleterious effects of misogynoir and who may not identify as women or femmes, as Sakia Gunn's murder unfortunately illustrates. Similarly, not all non-binary Black femmes experience misogynoir because they are not read as Black women in public. For some femmes, homophobia and femphobia might be the lens through which they become targets of violence. Black femphobia is an important form of oppression to discuss, but it is not a synonym for misogynoir. Misogynoir is deployed because of social beliefs about Black women.
That was me, Moya. I apologize.
That's
I wanted
okay.
to make sure everyone could see you full screen again.
Oh, sure. I missed the thing in the chat. Misogynoir is deployed because of social beliefs about Black women, and those of us who are read as Black women, despite our self-identification, get caught in the crosshairs. Having already used my invented portmanteau of misogynoir in the title and introduction, and a new framework of digital alchemy that I'll be talking about in a moment, I didn't want to overload with more new terms of which people needed to keep track. So in the book, I write out Black, non-binary, and agender and gender variant folks. And so I'm gonna actually go back to sharing my screen so you can see just why these terms are what terms I'm using. So again, Black women and Black non-binary, agender, and gender variant folks is how I talk about this within the text. Black non-binary, agender, and gender variant folks are often invisible in data collection processes, making their realities marginal within the already liminal space of Black women's digital alchemy. Nearly all of the data collected from my book assume that the category Black women is capacious enough to address misogynoir, but Black non-binary and gender variant people are also on the front lines of the Black feminist transformation of misogynoir. So something that I ask people to do is to think about how transformation is part of what we can do with language. Some have come to identify as Black feminists, the people that I've talked to in the book, having not understood themselves as Black feminists before, and others reject the term in favor of womanism. But beyond all of that, it's really Black women who anchor the book, even as Black women can experience some relative privilege in their relation to their Black non-binary, agender, and gender variant peers. So I wanted to talk now a little bit about digital alchemy. And this is a term that I created to really get to what are some of the ways that people are actually addressing and dealing with misogynoir through the media that they create. I argue that Black women and Black non-binary, agender, and gender variant folks' digital resistance through content creation that challenges problematic representations is a form of self-production that disrupts the mainstream narrative that promulgates narrow and stereotypical visions of identity. Both the process of creation and the materials created are co-constitutive harm reduction strategies in that they don't eradicate the injury of misogynoir, but they do help alleviate some of the painful impact. Harm reduction recognizes that some harm is inevitable given the current reality of society, but we can greatly reduce the impact of harm by taking appropriate actions. Black women and Black non-binary, agender, and gender variant folks are actively reimagining the world through digital content creation that challenges the misogynoir, that negatively impacts their health, and minimizes the harm that they experience in the process. Black women and Black non-binary, agender, and gender variant folks have mobilized via Twitter hashtags to challenge their representation in American visual culture, carving out precious space for incubating restorative practices and projects digitally. I build toward an understanding of digital alchemy as a praxis designed to create better representations for those most marginalized through the implementation of networks of care beyond the boundaries of the digital from which it springs. Alchemy is the science of turning regular metals into gold. When I talk about digital alchemy, I'm thinking of the ways that women of color, Black women, Black non-binary, agender, and gender variant folks transform everyday digital media into valuable social justice media that recodes the failed scripts that negatively impact their lives. Digital alchemy shifts our attention from negative stereotypes in digital culture to the redefinition of representations Black women are creating that provide another way of viewing their worlds. I argue that this process of creating transformational images challenges the normative standards of bodily representation and health presented in popular and medical culture. And this really gets into my last point, which is about transformation. So the law of conservation of energy that you might remember from your science classes is that energy is neither created nor destroyed. It can only be transformed from one form to another. I titled this book Misogynoir Transformed because I could not let misogynoir go unmodified. A book titled Misogynoir on its own does not represent an action or protest. I did not want to simply explain or rehearse examples of misogynoir in a book-length project. I wanted an action to animate misogynoir and to signal my interest in its destruction. I didn't want to account for all the vile hate that is misogynoir without making clear that there are those of us working to transform it. The idea of misogynoir being transformed, using that swirling mass of negative energy against itself to make something altogether different, is really inspiring to me. Embodied transformation, a concept from the practice of somatics, is re-articulated by organizer and facilitator Adrienne Maree Brown in her book Pleasure Activism, The Politics of Feeling Good, is a foundation for how I'm thinking about transformation. Transformation is also a key component of transformative justice, a liberatory approach to lessening harm and violence in society that does not center alienation or punishment as a means of behavior modification. And I'm going to now play just a little clip of Adrienne Maree Brown talking specifically about how we address transformative justice and what it actually is.
So when I'm trying to explain transformative justice to people, I usually back away from, I don't go straight at, okay, this is transformative justice. I usually actually go back to punitive justice. I start out with like what we're used to and what we've been socialized into is punitive justice. And then I ask people, if I'm in a room full of people, even in a room full of friends, I'll be like, how many of you grew up in an experience where you were punished when harm happened? And I give examples. You were expelled, you were put in detention, you're suspension, you're put on timeout. But the main move was you're removed from community in some way because you've done harm. And people are like, oh, yeah, everyone either has that experience or they were part of spaces where they saw that experience. And then I'm like, we grow that up so that then you go into prison or you get the death penalty or you get canceled from your community, right? It's the same process. So we live in this, that's what we're swimming in. And then I talk about restorative justice as a steps in the right direction, right? It's like harm has happened. How do we restore ourselves back to that relationship that existed before the harm happened? So I'm like, someone stole your purse, you get an apology, they do some community service. Hopefully we return to like where we were. But for me, I always say that doesn't go far enough because if the original conditions were unjust, then returning to those original conditions is not actually justice, right? You're just gonna have someone who's like, great, now I returned everything to you, I still don't have anything and I'm still hungry and I still need something. I'm like, so we need to go further. So to me, transformative justice, the first aspect of it is that it goes all the way down to the root system of the harm and says, how do we change, heal, transform, pull this up? What do we need to do at the root system so that this harm is no longer possible? Like what we're trying to do is stop this harm from ever being possible again. And then how do we understand that the state is so committed to punitive justice, so the state is not going to be able to engage in transformative justice with us. So we don't go to the state to do this kind of deep work. And then how do we turn towards each other to hold this space? And in that turning to each other, we have to say, I believe you can transform.
What might seem difficult to understand is that my call for transformation is inclusive of those who cause harm by perpetuating misogynoir. Rather than punish or shame those who participate in the proliferation of misogynoir, transformation requires consequences for harmful actions. And thinking about that, I wanted to lastly turn to an example that comes out of popular culture in this moment. I'm sure you're all familiar with Will Smith and the Oscar slap that happened not that long ago. And this is work by Richie Reseda, who is a transformative justice activist, who's talking about what transformative justice might look like in the context of the Oscar slap.
What's the big old deal? First of all, as a society that relies on people with guns and badges to kidnap people and hold them against their will when we don't like them, let's please not waste our time talking about how violence isn't the answer. And instead of wasting our times with arbitrary, imaginary conversations about who's right and who's wrong and who deserves to have what happens, let's talk about what abolitionist responses to a situation like this could be, and apply it in our own lives and mind our own business. The first thing we would do here from a transformative justice standpoint is talk to everybody who's been harmed. That means Chris, that means Will, and that means Jade. Give them an opportunity to feel heard and talk about what justice could look like for them and help them achieve their appropriate level of accountability, if any. And if they want, help restore the relationship. And we'd make sure our solutions help dismantle the system that led to the harm in the first place, which in this case was ableism and misogynoir, or the hatred of black women. Shout out to Denzel, who stepped in as an elder and a transformative justice practitioner and low-key did elements of this already. Let's apply this solution-based way of thinking to our own conflicts and just stop throwing black women under the bus.
I want us to now think about how misogynoir being transformed can create opportunities for us to move into a new direction with the media that we create, with the connections that we have and the relationships we want to build. So thank you so much for your time and attention. And I'm looking forward to a conversation with all of you.
Thank you, Moya. What a rich talk. There's so much to dig into, and I know that people are waiting to ask their own questions. I have the pleasure and the privilege of asking a couple of questions first to get things going. And one of the first things that I wanted to ask you was about the experience of watching an idea like misogynoir, which wraps up power and pain, leave your hands and take on its own life across platforms and media, and watching people appropriate it and adapt it and make it their own in different contexts. And I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about the nuances in which that idea, as it was taken up, the nuances that you saw people bringing out that you liked, as well as some things where you felt like people were, misunderstanding or distorting the work in ways that deserve to be called out.
Thank you for that question, Noah. I think I started out with just surprise that people found the term useful. So in the early days, it was just exciting to see that people thought the term had some utility beyond how I was using it. And then people started to use it in contexts outside of the US. And I think that's when I realized that, oh, misogynoir is global, because when I initially was writing about it, I was thinking about the very specific context of the United States. But I do know that anti-Blackness is global, but my assumptions about how misogynoir looked had a very US flavor to it. So I've been really inspired by the way people in other places have been taking it up. I just did a talk at the University of Columbia, and that was really incredible to hear the first chapter translated into Spanish, because the way that colorism and anti-Blackness operate in Colombia and other parts of Latin America is something that I don't have the specificity to actually address. So I think one of the ways that I've been so moved by the term's movement, it has been the way people in different places have made the term useful to their specific context. I'd say one of the harder things has been people trying to use the term for context outside of the United States, or not outside of the United States, but outside of the experiences of Black women specifically. So sometimes the term gets reduced to women of color. And I think there's something really powerful about different groups of women of color thinking about their own experiences and how it doesn't necessarily look like misogynoir in their particular context. There's something about that specificity that I think is really important that I wanted to preserve. And so that was one of the impetuses for writing the book, was that, I wanted to make sure that people knew why I was being so particular about this being related to anti-Blackness and misogyny, and wanting to make also clear that I know that this isn't something that just cis Black women experience, that this is something that a lot of people who are read as Black women also have to endure.
Thank you. I want to pick up on digital alchemy because it's such it's so useful and a fun idea to play with. And one of the things that really captured me in the examples in your book is the way it seemed to me, and tell me if I'm wrong, that you were often emphasizing the way the transformation is not responding to a hateful portrayal, not responding to a dystopia with a utopia, but responding to a dystopia with with a complex, rich, realistic portrait in media. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that, maybe a bit abstract. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. And I wonder if you can speak to that, what you see as the power of that sort of transformation, a turn away from hate, not with sort of celebration, but rather with reality.
Yeah, I mean, one of the real truths about my relationship to the Academy has been an understanding of the research that I'm doing, a goal for it to be applied. So I think I always look at my work with the question of what is it doing? How is it useful? What can come from this? And so when I think about digital alchemy, it's really what I saw in the things that I was studying. I saw people not necessarily bearing or spending a lot of time dealing with some of the negative portrayals that were sort of inevitable, right? There's a ubiquitous way that misogynoir exists in our world. But what I saw were people making light of it, not dealing with it at all, and turning their attention to more generative projects. That's what was really inspiring to me. And, as I said in the preface and introduction, I just didn't want to write a book that was all of the ways that misogynoir shows up, because you can really look anywhere and see that. It was trying to uplift all of the ways that people have been able to craft what they needed with the social platforms that exist. And the social media platforms that exist are so very, very limited in that they're created for these purposes of profit, but people have been able to repurpose them in these really amazing ways. And so digital alchemy is a way to celebrate that shift from regular social media platform to a tool for social justice.
Thank you for that. You mentioned working in the Academy, and something that I noticed and loved about your talk was the way that your talk pulled in different voices, gave platform to different speakers, allowed them to be present. And I thought about how the richness that becomes possible in a digital space, which is hard in a book, which is hard in a talk. And I'm wondering if you could speak to some of the media that you're asked to sort of share your work in are so static. And I wonder if you could talk to the struggle with that and how you envision new spaces for sharing knowledge in the Academy and beyond.
Yeah, so I'm an only child. So I think I've always wanted community and to connect with other people. And that's been my approach as a scholar as well, is to bring everybody. I definitely identify as a gatherer, as somebody who likes to bring people together. And a lot of my work is co-authored. And something I say in the acknowledgements of as well is that no academic book is a single author book, truly. Again, shout out to Lisa for being here, one of my frequent writers as I was building this process and doing the work of creating this text. There's something really powerful by working together. And it felt important to think about and bring into the space all of the voices that have really shared and helped to create the context for the work that I do. It's not something that can be done in isolation, and I think we are better together. So that's something I really want to embody in all of the spaces where I move, both academically and in other kinds of organizing that I do. The collective is really powerful, and the digital does provide an opportunity for that collectivity. yeah, the videos that I was able to embed in the presentation really gave me an opportunity to lift those voices and bring them in, which is very different than me just reading what those people said. There's something really dynamic about being able to see and hear folks that I think adds another dimension, another texture to what we're talking about, and also gets us to see that this isn't just something that we can do by ourselves. It takes a village.
Excellent. I have to say, for those, one of the many wonderful things about being digital now, today, one of the things that we aren't able to do is do a book signing. So I just want to briefly say that here's a link to the book for those of y'all who haven't had a chance to look at it. And I know that one of our wonderful independent bookstores in Madison, A Room of One's Own, carries it, and you can pick it up there instead of buying it on Amazon. And before passing it off to the audience, I just want to ask, where are you going next? What are you excited about working on now?
I'm really excited about a lab that I am creating at Northwestern, which is called the Digital Apothecary. It's a lab that includes graduate and undergraduate students who are working in different areas, trying to address what's happening at the level of internet production, both at the level of the infrastructure of the internet and also how we use it. I've been thinking a lot about creating social justice salves for the digital is one way that I've talked about the work that we're doing in the lab, creating what we need so that we can actually sustain interaction with digital tools, which are very, I would say, much like a pharmacon, both medicinal and poisonous, depending on how you look at it. So one is trying to address how we use the digital, but then also thinking too about what does the digital enable. So I see the work of really thinking about the infrastructure of the unit of the internet, and then also the infrastructure of the research lab as both spaces that can really model a different way of relating to social inequality. And we are really trying to build our lab with intention and with a certain practice that matches our values. So at the beginning, you heard me read a land acknowledgement, but also a little bit of a critique of a land acknowledgement. And one thing that we're doing with our lab, and something that our lab is pushing for at Northwestern, is trying to make sure that land acknowledgements are also connected to a land tax that is going back to community, to these Indigenous communities on which our institutions are sitting, and trying to also make sure that the way that we're doing our work actually gets us closer to the world we want, not just in what we say, but also in what we do.
Excellent. Look forward to learning more about where that goes. Now, I know that folks who are here on Zoom have questions, so please use the raise hand feature, and Micah, who is managing our tech, will acknowledge you and welcome you to ask your questions. While we are waiting for those to percolate up, one of the things that I wanted to sort of follow up on about what you were just saying, which I think dovetails both with the lab that you're building and what you said about using digital platforms, is the roots of your work often in collectives, and that the number of times you've written with collectives and helped to form collectives, and even chapters within your book. I know that for many folks, co-writing is a challenge and a struggle. There's a justice process in co-writing as well. And I'm wondering, for the scholars and the writers and the activists in the group who are working with that collective process, if you can talk about a little bit about your own insight into finding the intellectual rhythm in the collaborative process.
Yeah, I would say the intellectual rhythm is very slow. Like this is like, I don't know, a blues sort of beat. It's like a rhythm that is not very high energy because it's sustained over a long period of time. I also think that the rhythm can shift though. I think there are times where it perhaps speeds up a little bit, but I'd say in the beginning, it's really slow, and other language that comes from Adrienne Marie Brown as coming from Mervyn Mercado is this language around moving at the speed of trust, trying to make sure that you're not going faster than the group trusts everybody. So I really try to incorporate that into my work as well, trying to move at the speed of trust of all of the people who are at the table. And so that means things might just take a bit longer than others might expect. It's not necessarily on the timeline that academia would want you to be. And it's, academia is a funny thing because, there's a lot of hurry up and wait in academia. And what I experience in my own work is a lot of like going slowly, going slower, maybe stopping and starting again. And that rhythm can be uncomfortable if you're not used to it, but I find it really refreshing because it creates the opportunity for longer relationships and for people to connect over periods of time, and leads to less of the, I think, the extractive capacity that the academy is unfortunately known for.
Yeah. Yeah. So I see we have a question from Haley Cantor.
Hi. So I know you got asked about how, like you said, that color was changing when you went to talk about misogynoir around the world and how it got changed rather from Black women specifically to women of color. I was wondering if you also saw a change in like the terms that you used as well. You said that you used other specific terms, I can find them, like Black women, Black non-binary and agender. Did you see those terms change as well when you went to talk in different countries?
Oh, great question, Haley. So I think that's one thing that's still ongoing because there are different ways that people think about gender, even beyond gender as an identity. So something that's been really interesting to me in my work has been thinking about what do we do when gender is and sexuality are not identities that people take on, they're actually behaviors. So there's a practice in Suriname called mati work, where women have relationships, romantic, sexual, and otherwise with other women, but they don't consider themselves lesbian. They aren't regarded in their community that way. And mati work has been a really important site of thought for me because if we're not thinking about sexuality or gender as identities, then how do we organize and think about who our people are if that's not how we are connecting, making sense of who community is? So I really think that when we have a global perspective, it doesn't just change the language that we use, but it might even also change the frame itself. So I'm really interested to see what kinds of ways misogynoir gets picked up and adapted by people who have even a different concept and understanding of when it comes to gender and sexuality, even more broadly.
Thank you.
Other folks, questions? Megan has a question.
Hi, thank you so much. This is really, really wonderful. I noticed you use a lot of like alchemical metaphors and this notion of pharmacon and all these really creative, compelling ways of organizing these different ideas. And since alchemy is kind of often thought of as, at least popularly, a sort of like pre-science or early form of science, and of course, like we often group in science and tech together in academia as like a STEM field. So coming from a humanities perspective, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how these metaphors, how you use them and how they help us think and talk about these transformative concepts.
And you said the use of metaphor. Can you say that just one more time?
Yeah, metaphors, like thinking of it as alchemical or like transformation in that way, or like a salve you mentioned, all these different ways of talking about it. It was really exciting and creative.
Oh, thank you. I think I do draw a bit on the scientific background that I have, where, you know, in the sciences, there are all these ways that people try to explain different processes. And a lot of those descriptions and explanations have a lot of gendered and ableist assumptions packed into them. So one transformative piece of writing that I teach and that has also stayed with me for a very long time is The Egg and Sperm by Emily Martin. And in it, she talks about the metaphors that people use to describe reproduction and how, you know, the egg is passively waiting for the sperm goes on this heroic, epic journey through the vagina to meet the egg and is battling and dealing with all of these negative conditions. So this warrior image of the sperm and this very passive damsel in distress language that's used to describe that particular process is one where we see our social assumptions as a society sort of baked into this process that's happening between these cells, right? It gets put into this other context that doesn't actually map onto what the science actually says. So I try to be really conscious of the metaphors that I use, but I understand that they're helpful. You know, they give people a way to make sense of things that aren't always very clear. So in thinking about salves and thinking about transformation, I'm drawing on, and harm reduction, I'm drawing on material that exists in the world, but also kind of connecting it to my own interest in medicine and thinking about the digital in ways that kind of give us a sense of how we might treat or imagine the body in a couple of different new ways.
Thank you. I see Sai and then Stephanie.
I think you're muted, Sai.
Sai, you're
still
muted.
Okay. Thanks so much for a wonderful talk. I was, of course, very taken by your concept of misogynoir, and I wonder if you can expand. You talk about it as this sickly sort of coming together of racism and misogyny, but it seems like it's not an additive thing. It seems like a kind of poisonous synergistic operation. So how is it not additive and rather synergistic? Could you talk more about that? Thank you.
Yes, I definitely talk about it as synergistic in my work, that there's something about it that is not, it's not just the sum of its parts. It's definitely an amalgamation that creates something that's even more negative and harmful in terms of how it impacts Black women. And because of that coming together, it is really corrosive in a way that doesn't really map onto a very clean additive approach. And I think we can look to other terms like intersectionality and the work that Kimberly Crenshaw has done there that show just how an additive frame doesn't quite get us to talking about the way misogynoir impacts our lives. So famously, one of Kimberly Crenshaw's early articulations of intersectionality was looking at a particular place of employment where there were jobs for women, but women were coded as white, and then there were jobs for men where men were coded as Black. But there was not a space where a Black woman could get hired within that particular configuration. And so it wasn't just additive, right? It wasn't just that they were Black women who couldn't access the jobs because they were, Black and they were women, but neither space created room for them to get what they needed. And so to me, that kind of shows that an additive approach doesn't fully encapsulate or get at the way misogynoir is synergistic. It's the way that anti-Blackness and misogyny come together that makes someone like Sakia Gunn a target, that create a context in which Rekia Boyd, who is a Black person who has been gunned down by the police, something that the Black community has always been very vocal about, but doesn't come out in the same numbers or with the same energy after her death that they do when compared to George Floyd or someone else who is a man.
Thank you.
Stephanie, you're up.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. I've found it really enlightening, but I was just wondering if you would be able to expand upon, so misogynoir is like kind of the coexistence of racialized and sexualized discrimination that Black women face. I was just wondering if you would be able to touch a little bit more about Black women with disabilities and how that kind of plays into both the racialized, sexualized, and desexualization of their identities.
Absolutely. Great question. So one factor that has been really part of my axis of discrimination, of oppression that I've been really concerned with is ableism. And there have been a lot of Black women online who have been really instrumental in raising ableism as an important intersection for thinking about how oppression happens in our world. So I'm thinking about people like Felissa Thompson, Izetta Mobley, and more, who are doing this work of showing how misogynoir has another impact that is specific to disabled people, and that disabled Black women experience misogynoir in lots of ways that include them being desexualized and also being ignored in our conversations. I would add that misogynoir really is trying to look at the way ableism operates within the strong Black woman myth, this idea that Black women have this superhuman ability to kind of endure. And that's a form of ableism that I don't think we talk about enough, one that misogynoir is trying to unpack as well, in addition to the ableism that Black disabled women experience in their day-to-day lives. One of the reasons that I think it's not often seen or even that Black disabled women have trouble talking about it is because of the proliferation of the strong Black woman myth. And so that even Black disabled women feel as though they can't even talk about what's going on in their own lives and worlds because there's a perception that they should just be able to deal and be able to handle it. So the strong Black woman myth is one of the ways that ableism is really part and parcel to the definition of misogynoir. But I also think that Black disabled women are using misogynoir to talk about their own experiences in even more nuanced ways. And that's pushing the conversation further.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Other questions percolating out there? Moya, one thing that really came through to me in your talk this time that I've been thinking about, which didn't jump out in the same way when I was reading your work earlier, was harm reduction and the place of harm reduction in your work. And my initial experience with harm reduction was many years ago. I worked with a needle exchange in San Francisco, and the thing that I remember about it was that how it was a queer space in a lot of ways, and harm reduction struck me as a discourse that was rooted in a queering of medical ideals and ideology, and I think that that's often missed in sort of popular uptake of harm reduction. The notion of harm reduction as a pragmatic sort of discourse, and I'm wondering if that plays into your own thinking about harm reduction, and if you think about the relationship of harm reduction to its deeply queer, marginalized roots.
Yes, that's definitely where I learned about harm reduction, was through queer community and queer spaces. And also through the work of people really trying to help people who are using drugs find the materials and resources to do that safely. And that being modeled off of and coming from queer community in other parts of the world where there's less stigma around drug use, and practices that were really mobilized in a way that moved us to think about what does it mean, how do we address what can be harmful about the fact that people are using, but also are there ways that we can make it less so, that things don't have to be as harmful as they are. And I think it opens the door into thinking about our world differently. It moves us away from this binaristic thinking of things are all good or all bad, and gets us more to the reality of life, which is, as some people say, everything in moderation. Or another way to think of it is there are things that we can do that can make our practices less harmful and more create more possibility than our society would actually imagine that there can be. And so I really see harm reduction as an important tool for moving us in a new direction, or not new, since people have been doing this work of harm reduction for a long time, but the application of harm reduction to other spaces outside of public health, I guess, is really important. And I'm really enjoying seeing it showing up in places and spaces that people might not expect it to.
I love that, the use of harm reduction in media and digital imagery and visual imagery. I think that's brilliant.
Noah, I want to relay a question from the chat that we received from Reginald, who's not able to unmute himself. And so his question, if you want to follow along in the chat, is related to Twitter and the announcement that Elon Musk made that he may purchase Twitter or purchase all the shares of Twitter that are available on the stock market, which is that Black users have transformed this platform from its early emergence as a mass media tool. So clearly there's fragility when Black discourse relies on these corporate structures. The need for our own independent systems or tools in the digital age are necessary. How do you manage this visibility and fragility in your community building work in digital spaces? From Professor Reginald Royston at UW-Madison.
Such a great question, Reginald. I mean, I feel as though there's something really powerful about making our own tools, because then we can make them outside of a capitalist framework that only understands the utility of these tools in terms of how much money they make. So being outside of that system is really useful. Unfortunately, because these tools are free, in theoretically, there's a reason that they are so accessible. One of the things people talk about with social media, as you know, is that you're the product when it's free, and getting people to buy and support community media that we create ourselves, also to me brings up questions of scale. Maybe we don't have the infrastructure to build the same kind of digital expansive platform like Twitter if we go into the space of creating our own tools. But that's where the local comes in. And I think that's a really important shift for imagining what kind of world we want. So when I talk about transformative justice too, transformative justice, I don't believe can be achieved at the scale of the nation state. I don't think we can have transformative justice at the level of what we understand as the United States of America. I think that transformative justice is something that's possible in communities. I don't even know necessarily that it's possible in cities. So are we open to, able to understand, move towards a way of relating to tools in the digital that are on a much smaller scale at the level of our local communities? There's some really exciting work that's coming out of Detroit connected to the Allied Media Project. And one of the things that they're creating are these mesh networks, so internet for a community. So you don't have to deal with all of the internet, but the people in your community, your local setting, maybe 10 square blocks, all have access to a mesh network. You can communicate and talk to your neighbors in a different way. I wonder what it would look like if we had more opportunities for a media that is more homegrown and sustained by and invested by the users. So thinking also about collectives, collaboratives, what is possible when we are both the means of production and also the people who own the means of production. Excuse me. What might that afford us in our digital world making? I think it might create a different way of relating, but I do think that we might have to forgo or let go of our ideas of a scale that Twitter or some of these other social media platforms have allowed us to take for granted, or come with the added reality that we are the product within those systems.
Now, I wish Reginald could be joining us in conversation, because for those of you all who don't know him, his work focuses on internet practices and democracy in Ghana and the Ghanaian diaspora in the United States. And I think that that answer is probably right up his alley. And a lot of the stuff, he's a technological developer himself. So I'd love to see y'all get into it. Other
Yes.
questions?
Hopefully we can talk later too.
Yeah. Other questions from the audience? Feel free to enter in chat if you are unable to unmute. I see Kate Thompson.
Hi. I would just love for you to expand on the transformative justice and how that works when it comes to including those who are inflicting the harm and what that looks like, especially on media platforms that are so huge like Twitter, and it can be coming from anywhere. If you could touch on that.
Yeah. And this is really what I was thinking about when I was saying, I don't know that transformative justice actually works very well on the scale of something large like Twitter, because that requires time. So a lot of transformative justice practices that people are involved in happen over the course of months and decades and require people to actually opt into that process. You can't really make someone be accountable. Unfortunately, in transformative justice, people have to say that they're willing to go through the process if they've caused harm. It's something that the person who caused harm and the person who experienced harm decide mutually that this is something that they want to do. And a lot of people don't choose to do that. So I don't know that transformative justice is really something that works at the scale or is possible within a corporate institution like Twitter. And this, I think, is part of what Adrienne Maree Brown was getting at when she was talking about, the state is not really where we go to or can go there to look for transformative justice to be possible. Because the way that the state operates is through using really punitive and using punitive practices to get people to change their behavior. And as we know and see in our world, that's not generally very successful. But in the book, in chapter 4, I actually interview 2 Tumblr users who were really popular during my time using Tumblr. And one of them, Danielle Cole, talks about how they would imagine a social media platform that would allow the users to also be very much engaged in the design of the platform and would include opportunities when someone causes harm for that person to essentially be put into a separate location, away from some of the people who are participating in the platform, and talked with by people who are willing on the platform to talk to them about what about their behavior was problematic, and also give them resources and things that could be helpful so that they can be reintegrated into the group once they've agreed or demonstrated some way that their behavior had changed. And I think that's a very different way of addressing things rather than banning people, kicking people out, etc. There's a way that somebody could learn from and potentially shift their relationship to the platform over time. So I think that's one way that we can get at this, but I don't think that that's possible, unfortunately, with the size and scale of something like Twitter at this point.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
I see a question from Christina Green.
Yeah, hi, thank you so much. This was really fabulous. This may be kind of an unfair question, but one of the things, of course, that I thought about when you're talking about transformative and restorative justice was abolitionism. Mm-hmm. And I know you're dealing with, digital media, and I was really intrigued by your last comments about how you don't really see transformative justice being successful on a national scale. And so that immediately made me think about prison abolitionism, because we're talking about state sanctioned harm and violence. And so I guess I just wanted to, like I said, this might be unfair and not something that you're really dealing with, but I just wanted to know if you had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, no, I think that a lot of abolitionists are really focused on the local and trying to think about transformative justice happening at the level of people's communities. In the book, I talk about an organization that no longer exists anymore, but was called Generation 5. And the idea was we could end childhood sexual abuse in 5 generations and what it would take to do that. And a lot of the ways that they talked about doing that had nothing to do with the nation state. So it's not even necessarily that the nation state doesn't exist. It's a question of where we go and who we draw on to create the conditions that make it possible for people not to want to cause harm. And I think that's a level of really dealing with the individual and also dealing with kind of our expectations around who do we hold accountable for the resources that are often missing that actually enable so much harm. So in the example that Adrienne Marie Brown gives in the video that I played, talking about someone stealing a purse, if we do a restorative justice address where someone gets their purse back, their money back, et cetera, we haven't changed the material conditions in which someone felt the need to steal, right? That is something that we need to actually take up on a level that our nation state has not paid attention to. And so this is also what we see as sort of the early stages of abolition, which are calling on us to demand less money going to the police, defund the police, but put money into actual social services, which are some of the things that actually prevent violence from occurring in the first place. A lot of things that motivate violence are people not having what they need. So if we shift our attention towards making sure that people have what we need, we can ultimately actually address some of these questions and get at abolition in a different way.
So we're coming up on the end of our time, and I'm asking anyone who has a question they've been sitting on. This is your moment. Feel free to raise your hand. Moya, what I hear you calling out in part in the answers to the last couple of questions is the need to shift in the way that we think about the infrastructure of sort of social interaction. And I guess that was present also in your answer to Reginald's question as well, that there's a sort of reliance on the systems of capitalism, the systems of the nation state, which is not going to do the things that we need to do and solve the problems that we have. I see Paige has raised a hand, so maybe I'll pass it off to Paige to ask that last question.
Yeah.
Hello. Oh, the pressure. I was going to say, I am actually a public school teacher, and I've seen how social media and, just the proliferation of screens have really affected how children relate to themselves. I think we've all seen that. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to just hear maybe your hopes for the future and how teachers especially can really show students how, these tools are for them and they can be used for their greatest potential.
Oh, great question, Paige. Also taking us into possibilities and where we can go. One, I think there has to be media literacy and digital media literacy in K through 12. That's something that we can do as academics who are concerned about and doing this work. I think one of the things we owe public schools and K through 12 education is the importance of thinking about how the digital is changing and shaping our world and the realities of young people who are coming after us. So I think having time, dedicated time within the school curriculum to actually learn about how the digital works, learning about algorithms, not even necessarily learning about how to build tools, although I think that's important as well, but just helping people understand that the ads that they see, the way that they interact with social media is by design. The things that keep you on your devices, notifications, all of that is intentional and has been very much designed on purpose to keep you engaged. I'm sure you know that there's research about how young women in particular are really adversely affected by using Instagram, and making that information more public and talking about why that is needs to be part of how people learn about using this particular platform. What are the particular, I guess, cost benefit analysis of using Instagram if you are a young person coming up? I think that's an important site of address and redress when it comes to these tools. And that, again, requires us to think not about some institution over there kind of managing this, but our role and our interest as people on the planet who are concerned about who's coming after us, making sure that they have what they need to survive and get to the next stage of their development.
That's a wonderful place to end. It does seem to me that when we talk about media literacy, oftentimes ideas like misogynoir are not present in standard curricula. And it seems so important that as we move forward in advancing media literacy in whatever educational spaces we're in, that understanding the culturally specific nature of representation, what it does and how it's made and transformed and who it affects is such a crucial part of that. One more reason why this work does so much. I hope you all can join me in thanking Moya Bailey for being with us today, for spending this evening with us and sharing so much of the wonderful work she's done. Thank you, Moya.
Thank you all so much. It's been a real pleasure.